A coder in a glass office calculates how to save 1 billion lives, while a neighbor next door struggles for rent. Writing 2 days ago, William Thibeau looks at effective altruism and finds a strange math that prizes abstract beings over the person standing in front of you. It's a morality built on spreadsheets. Something interesting emerges when that logic hits the ground. Sarah Setlaelo, writing yesterday, looks back at Nelson Mandela. He wasn't a man of formulas. He chose the messy, uncomfortable work of sitting across from enemies to build a nation. Putting these together shows the friction between the cold clarity of a calculation and the difficult, face-to-face reality of compromise. A daughter's smile is often treated as a mere evolutionary defect by the Silicon Valley elites, William Thibeau critiques for Compact, writing just 2 days ago. He tracks how billion-dollar firms like Anthropic are built on effective altruism, a philosophy that values abstract strangers over neighbors. Listen for the way he links the 1970s rise of television to a moral shift that pushed the neighbor's child out of view.
Your daughter's smile is dearer to you than that of a stranger half a world away. Of course it is. Human life is situated and embodied, and so are our obligations and loves. But the ideology that holds sway over many Silicon Valley elites diagnoses this preference for those near and dear to you as an evolutionary defect. Instead, according to the adherents of this worldview, every sentient being in every place, in every time, holds the same moral claim on every other. This philosophy is known as effective altruism, EA. Scandals in the EA world, most notably the downfall of the cryptocurrency entrepreneur Sam Bankman-Fried, prompted many effective altruists to renounce the name in recent years. But the ideas endure. In 2025, 6 EA-aligned grantmakers deployed $1.25 billion, and this number is set to grow along with the success of the world's leading artificial intelligence company, Anthropic, which was founded on EA principles. The firm's founders have pledged to donate 80% of their wealth upon the firm's IPO. These wealth pledges, combined with company policy of matching employee donations, will create billions in philanthropic capital, channeled through EA's entrenched institutions. Effective altruism is the final flowering of utilitarianism, that Victorian philosophy of calculating reformers, transplanted into Silicon Valley boardrooms and granted the false vitality of billion-dollar balance sheets. Because it is constitutively blind to what makes a civilization worth preserving, its utopia will entail dissolving America in the name of humanity. Several historical developments help explain EA's success.
One is the rise of mass media, which widened the circle of concern that once might have encompassed only family and neighbors. By the beginning of the 1970s, televisions were present in nearly every American home. Footage of people suffering abroad became a regular fact of American life. In 1972, the philosopher Peter Singer published Famine, Affluence, and Morality, the essay that would become EA's foundation. His argument was simple. If we can prevent suffering at little cost to ourselves, we must. And it makes no moral difference whether the person we help is a neighbor's child 10 yards from me or a stranger on another continent. Another precondition for EA's rise was the modern pathologization of traditional sources of identity: nation, religion, family, tradition. Especially after World War II, such particular loyalties were recast as the wellspring of fascism. Later generations, whose education dispossessed them of everything particular, were prepared to receive the EA program. In his 1981 book, After Virtue, Alistair MacIntyre argued that every culture is defined by its stock of characters, the social roles that embody its moral ideals. Characters, he wrote, are the masks worn by moral philosophies. The 20th century's main character was the bureaucrat, whose authority was derived from a seemingly scientific knowledge of human affairs, grounded in the supposed incommensurability of facts and values. The bureaucrat administers according to facts, while values are condemned to the private sphere. His expertise cannot be challenged. The standard of his authority is effectiveness. He flattens all goods into a single quantifiable dimension, converting them into units like lives saved, suffering averted, and dollars per outcome.
The unit's apparent neutrality conceals a range of ideological assumptions. The human good becomes a function of EA's calculus. Then, pretending value neutrality, EA denounces defection as backwards, unscientific, and immoral. Any challenge appears to spurn both science and human dignity. More recently, EA's impartialism has expanded far beyond those currently living, to what long-termists envision as 10 to the 58th plus potential future beings, human and digital. These future beings' existence depends on the avoidance of human extinction. The long-termists consider AI the dominant existential risk, and frontier development is concentrated in a few American labs. Some have taken the argument to its violent conclusion. Eliezer Yudkowsky, the most influential of the doomsayers, wrote in Time that nations should, quote, be willing to destroy a rogue data center by airstrike, nuclear war notwithstanding. And since 2022, the Zizians, a cult that splintered off from the same Bay Area rationalist scene, have been linked to 6 killings. Congress must treat the philanthropic apparatus of frontier AI as it treats any concentration of unaccountable power. Lawmakers should demand disclosure of the grant-making networks that fund labs with national security implications. They should condition federal contracts on terms any defense contractor would recognize. Disclose the instructions and value systems trained into the models. Certify systems sold to the government will execute lawful orders without an engineer's veto, and reserve the government's right to audit. The machines our government buys must serve the American people, not some present or future humanity. And procurement standards should favor open-weight models, which anyone can download, run, and test, so that the nation never depends on intelligence a handful of labs can withhold.
Thibeau leaves the listener with the image of a spreadsheet trying to outvote a soul. In that world, a daughter's smile is just one more data point to be weighed against the needs of 1,000 strangers. It is a vision of morality where the calculating reformer wins by being perfectly logical and completely detached. But notice what happens when that cold math hits the actual friction of history. Sarah Setlaelo brings in Nelson Mandela, a leader who didn't work with a calculator or even a grand theory, but with what she calls pragmatism. Where Thibeau warns about the bureaucrat mask, Setlaelo describes a philosopher king who understood that real change doesn't come from a wealth pledge or an IPO. It comes from the Janusian contradiction, the difficult face-to-face work of holding a divided country together. Read together, the two pieces suggest that the further a person gets from the neighbors right in front of them, the easier it is to mistake a formula for a virtue. Mandela's legacy looks less like a set of rules and more like an argument that the most important moral work happens in the exact spots where the math fails.
Africa's last philosopher king. Although Nelson Mandela lacked the oratory of Nkrumah and the theory of Senghor, his contribution to the world of ideas was something rarer: pragmatism. Nelson Mandela, the first democratic president of South Africa, 1994 to 1999, secured a catalytic and at times confounding place in world history. He was neither an enthralling orator, an imposing great man, nor a formidable intellectual. Yet his birthday, July 18th, has been marked by the United Nations as Nelson Mandela International Day. He is the only former head of state in contemporary times to enjoy such transnational iconic status. Here, I claim that his unique place in history can be explained by how closely he resembles a philosopher king. The philosopher king, or philosopher ruler, is a Western philosophy concept that originates in the following claim by Greek philosopher Socrates, found in his mentee Plato's book, The Republic. The human race will have no respite from evils until those who are really philosophers acquire political power, or until, through some divine dispensation, those who rule and have political authority in the cities become real philosophers. South African philosopher Mbogo Percy Moore adds that a philosopher is not only a scholar of the subject, but also an individual who has the capacity to make an original contribution to the development of philosophical thought and to the world of ideas, irrespective of his/her training in the discipline. Although the concept referred to state rule by the monarchy or aristocracy when the Republic was written, between 380 and 375 BCE, in contemporary democratic politics, the term is not used literally.
It has come to refer to heads of state, such as presidents, prime ministers, and chancellors, as well as the remaining monarchs. It simultaneously captures the Janusian contradiction of an ideal form of rational and ethical leadership, the philosophical element, and a caution of autocratic leadership, the king, ruler, or political element. Africa's first post-independence heads of state, also referred to as Africa's founding fathers, were conferred this mantle because they were not only political leaders, but also thought leaders. Political scholar Vusi Gumede asserts that a thought leader is someone who possesses the right kind of knowledge needed to challenge an existing paradigm in order to advance new thinking and to inspire others as well. They challenged Western imperialist and colonial paradigms. Despite their flaws, Africa's founding fathers became beacons of inspiration for their people during the euphoric era of independence and decolonization. Collectively, as Africa's philosopher kings, they formulated or promoted theories and concepts, delivered eloquent speeches, and wrote influential works pertaining to African communalism, African nationalism, African socialism, Afrocentrism, negritude, Nkrumahism, conscientism, and Ujamaa. South Africa is a unique outlier in this landscape. After the colonial settlement of the Dutch from the 17th century, predating the European scramble for Africa, 1880 to 1914, together with Britain's colonial stake in the late 19th century, the country endured a further 4 decades of white minority, Afrikaner nationalist, and apartheid, separate development rule. Thus, South Africa's liberation was only realized in 1994. Hence, Mandela became the last 20th century post-independence leader on the continent to assume office.
The delayed independence of South Africa provided Mandela with a unique vantage point to observe the successes and failures of other African leaders over 4 decades. Mandela read and studied widely throughout his 27-year prison term. He had the opportunity to contemplate, in solitude and together with fellow imprisoned comrades, the state of a nation and continent in crisis. Those reflections, the letters he wrote, and the meetings he held while still in prison refined his philosophy and politics. His brand of philosophical leadership can be distinguished from that of his African and global peers by the absence of ideological purism and the presence of ideological pragmatism. This is his original and philosophical contribution to the world of ideas. Whereas purism leaves no room for the dialectical tensions inherent in human existence, pragmatism navigates gray areas, straddles contradictions, embraces paradoxes, and facilitates synthesis of equal and competing interests. Arguably, this cultivated in him a range of ideal attributes that the philosopher king should possess. For they are lovers of the knowledge of the eternal and of all truth. They are haters of falsehood. Their meaner desires are absorbed in the interests of knowledge. They are spectators of all time and all existence. Also, they are of a social, gracious disposition, equally free from cowardice and arrogance. They learn and remember easily. They have harmonious, well-regulated minds. Truth flows to them sweetly by nature. Socrates acknowledges that it would be very rare to find someone who possesses all these qualities. I suggest that Mandela came remarkably close. He was born into the Xhosa Thembu aristocracy and was destined to succeed his father as a chief, but instead traded that role to pursue becoming a lawyer. He later became a leader of ethnic groups beyond his own, as the nation's Madiba, his family clan name. Those who met him speak of how he exuded nobility, Socrates' social, gracious disposition. At the same time, he was equally free from cowardice and arrogance, as he was both assertive and humble. Giving up his inherited chieftaincy and stepping down after one presidential term distinguished him from African peers who aspired to lifelong presidential power. As he rose the political leadership ladder, he straddled several ideological positions and tensions. At once, he promoted the African nationalism and socialism that undergirded much of post-colonial Africa and his party, the African National Congress, ANC. He subscribed to communism as a secret member of the South African Communist Party, SACP. He became a patron of the multiracial United Democratic Front, UDF, while an inmate of Pollsmoor Prison in 1983. Ultimately, he presided over the architecture of the new Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, 1996, which is acclaimed as a beacon of liberal democracy. Holding all these ideologies cultivated his proficiency in political, social, cultural, and ethical pluralism. He initially advocated nonviolence when he joined the ANC in the 1940s, then changed his strategy as a founding commander-in-chief of the ANC's Umkhonto we Sizwe paramilitary wing in the 1960s. During the transition to democracy, he subsequently pivoted definitively to nonviolence.
The ability to entertain the continuum of violence, from pacifism to radicalism, inculcated his discernment of when violence serves a greater purpose and when it is merely gratuitous. Once he was released from prison, he modeled the surmounting of meaner desires, such as retribution, by championing forgiveness and reconciliation. He became a leader who mediated between victims and villains to bring about a synthesis greater than the interests of either side. Even though he is sometimes accused of abandoning the more substantive and economic claims of the Freedom Charter of 1955 when he became president, his moral compass was firmly trained on the Charter's preamble: South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. The values of non-racialism and multiculturalism drove his proactive engagement with stakeholders of all races, ethnicities, religions, identities, and interests. Affectionately known as Tata, the isiXhosa term for father, he displayed the kind of unconditional love that a father strives to have toward children of diverging personalities, different capacities, and competing interests. An apt demonstration of his cultural pluralism was his embrace of rugby, a sport historically dominated by the white minority as players and fans, when South Africa hosted the 1995 Rugby World Cup, and his successful support of the bid to host the 2010 FIFA World Cup in football, a sport dominated by the black majority. As a revolutionary activist, he made the terrorist lists of many countries, only to be awarded the 1993 Nobel Peace Prize. None of the other African philosopher kings had this privilege. He went on to become a consummate statesman who received more than 250 honors for his life's work. His name became shorthand for moral leadership. Haig Patapan, in his book Modern Philosopher Kings, Wisdom and Power in Politics, 2023, argues that democracy appears as the most formidable obstacle to all modern attempts to secure philosopher kings. Yet paradoxically, there is a need for noble attempts to civilize power and to empower wisdom. We should bear in mind, though, that while politics is open to wisdom and philosophy, there are also powerful elements within it resistant to such a union. Mandela's ideological pragmatism intuitively and strategically located the sweet spot where democracy and aristocracy, wisdom and power, philosophy and politics meet.
What lingers is the gap between a data point and a handshake. A spreadsheet might show how to save lives in the next century, but it doesn't explain how to sit across from an enemy and find a way forward. Nelson Mandela didn't find peace in a formula. He found it in stubborn compromise. When the focus stays fixed on a distant future, the neighbors right here can feel like a distraction. At what point does the math of doing good become an excuse to avoid the harder work of being good to the person in the room?